The first sign was subtle, almost laughable, if anyone had the luxury of laughing. Farmers in the northern plains spoke of shadows crossing the sun, massive shapes that moved against the wind, leaving the clouds trembling in their wake. Birds fell from the sky, their wings singed, as if the air itself had become a furnace. The reports were scattered, inconsistent, easy for the authorities to dismiss as mass hysteria or a freak storm. But those who saw it, the ones who survived to speak, knew the truth: something ancient and terrible had returned. Captain Elias Thorne stood on the edge of the cliff overlooking the valley below. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and scorched earth. He squinted at the horizon, scanning for the slightest movement, the faintest glimmer. And then he saw it. A ripple in the clouds, like smoke twisting in slow motion, grew larger and darker. The wind howled suddenly, snapping his jacket against his body. A shadow passed overhead, too massive, too precise to be any natural bird or storm phenomenon. He felt his chest tighten, a cold prickle crawling down his spine. The sky had changed. He had heard stories in childhood, whispered in hushed tones by villagers around dying fires. Dragons. Mythical beasts. Guardians or destroyers, depending on who told the tale. He had always dismissed them as fairy tales, fantasies crafted to frighten children. But standing there, staring at the clouds roiling in unnatural patterns, Elias felt the legends press down on him like a tangible weight. Then came the roar. It started low, almost imperceptible, a vibration in the chest, a trembling in the bones. But it grew, rising through the valley, through the forest, through every building in the small town below. Windows rattled. Dogs howled. And when the final, piercing note hit, Elias dropped to one knee, clutching the cliff's edge. It was no storm. No wind. It was alive. It was hunting. Reports flooded in within the hour. Entire herds of livestock vanished overnight. Crops were burned in patterns that resembled enormous claw marks. Villagers spoke of fires erupting spontaneously in fields, of shadows that moved against the wind, of eyes, glowing, molten, watching from the trees. And always the sky. The sky was turning, ever so slightly, a deep, ominous crimson at dawn and dusk. Elias returned to the town's council, his mind racing. Scientists, historians, military advisors, they all gathered around the table, arguing, debating, refusing to acknowledge the impossible. He could see it in their eyes, fear lurking behind their skepticism. No one wanted to say the word aloud, but it hovered in the room like smoke. Dragons. We don't have time for legends, one official said, slamming a fist on the table. We need actionable intelligence. Evidence. Elias leaned forward. Evidence? His voice was low, steady, and sharp. The evidence is burning in our fields, ripping through our forests, and screaming across the sky. You want proof? Look outside. The council fell silent. Outside the reinforced windows, the horizon was shifting. The clouds twisted unnaturally, and the faint red glow crept higher, like the first stroke of a painter's brush across the canvas of the sky. At night, the sound returned, closer this time. The townspeople huddled in homes, windows shuttered, doors barricaded. Children cried quietly, their whispers of mommy and dragon mingling with the wind that carried the faint, acrid smell of smoke and sulfur. No one slept. No one could. Elias patrolled the outskirts, rifle slung across his back, eyes straining in the darkness. The forest beyond the town felt alive, not with animals, but with something far older, far wiser, and far more dangerous. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a branch, made his pulse spike. Then he heard it again, the unmistakable beating of wings, heavier than any bird, moving with a deliberate, predatory rhythm. He froze. Somewhere above, in the unseen darkness, something large, ancient, and terrible was circling. Watching. Waiting. By morning, the valley was changed. Trees were charred, paths were torn asunder, and the air smelled of smoke and fear. A single massive footprint, clawed and deep enough to swallow a grown man, marked the edge of the forest. Elias knelt beside it, tracing the grooves with his gloved hand, feeling the raw heat radiating from the soil. The legends were real. And the legends were just beginning. The crimson in the sky was no longer subtle. It was bleeding across the horizon, a warning written in fire and shadow. It called to something buried deep in human memory, a memory of fear, awe, and the instinct to survive against impossible odds. Elias stood, tightening his coat, his mind already racing ahead. This was no longer about survival in the valley. It was about understanding, preparing, and, if possible, striking back against a force older than humanity itself. The sky had turned crimson, and with it, the first chapter of humanity's fight against the impossible had begun. The morning air was thick with smoke and ash. The crimson sky from the previous evening had faded to a dull, angry red, like embers clinging to the horizon. Captain Elias Thorne led a small reconnaissance team toward the edge of the valley, moving cautiously through the scorched forest. Every step felt heavy, as if the earth itself resisted their intrusion. The silence was almost worse than the chaos they had left behind. Every bird, every insect, every creature had vanished, leaving only an eerie, unnatural calm. "Keep your eyes sharp," Elias whispered to the team, his voice low enough that even the wind couldn't carry it. "Whatever did this, it's still here. And it's watching." Private Marcus Hale, the youngest of the group, clutched his rifle tightly, his knuckles white. "Sir, you really think it's—" "Yes," Elias cut him off. "It's what we've been fearing. The stories were true. Dragons aren't just myths anymore. They're real, and they're bigger than we ever imagined." They pushed forward, following a trail of scorched trees and deep claw marks gouged into the soil. It led them toward a narrow canyon, a natural corridor carved by centuries of wind and rain. The air here was thicker, hotter, smelling faintly of sulfur and something far more metallic, blood, Elias realized with a pang of dread. And then they heard it. A low, resonating rumble, like a boulder rolling across stone, but it was alive, pulsing through the ground and up through their boots. The team froze, scanning the shadowed cliffs on either side. Suddenly, the sound erupted into a roar, far closer this time. It was deafening, shaking the canyon walls, rattling the rocks beneath their feet. From the darkness above, a shape emerged. It was massive, its scales glinting in the dim light, each one as large as a man's shield. Wings, broader than any airplane Elias had ever seen, unfurled slowly, blotting out the sky. The creature's eyes burned gold, glowing with a terrifying intelligence. Its snout was long, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. The dragon was alive in every sense of the word. Predator, force of nature, ancient and indomitable. Marcus stumbled backward. "We're dead," he whispered, his voice trembling. Elias steadied him with a hand on the shoulder. "Not yet. Not if we're smart." The dragon shifted its weight, and the ground trembled beneath them. Flames licked its mouth, small sparks at first, then growing into a flickering glow. Its roar echoed again, a declaration of dominance, of territory, of raw power. And then it spoke, not in words humans could understand, but in a guttural, vibrating sound that seemed to resonate in their bones. The message was clear: leave, or be destroyed. The team scrambled to take cover behind the jagged rocks at the canyon's edge. Bullets, rifles, even explosives, they had prepared nothing for this. Every shot felt absurdly insignificant. The dragon's scales shimmered, deflecting the impact, as though mocking their attempts at resistance. Elias scanned the creature, trying to find any weakness. Its wings were massive and heavily muscled, its tail long and whip-like, capable of crushing anything in its path. Its eyes, though, gave him a small sliver of insight. They were intelligent, calculating, aware, studying them. This was not a mindless beast. This was strategy incarnate. "Sir," Marcus hissed, pointing to a faint shimmer along the dragon's chest, where a scale appeared slightly paler than the rest. "Maybe there." Elias shook his head. "Too small, too well protected. We survive by understanding it, not fighting blindly." The dragon took flight, its massive wings propelling it with terrifying grace. The ground shuddered as it rose, casting a shadow over the canyon that swallowed the team in darkness. Then it dived, fast and precise, flames streaking from its mouth. Trees were incinerated instantly, rocks shattered under the heat, and a deafening roar followed as the dragon disappeared beyond the canyon. Elias swallowed hard. The team was silent, still in shock, hearts pounding in their chests. This encounter had been brief, but it had changed everything. Myths had become reality. Humanity's dominance of the planet was no longer guaranteed. "We report this," Elias said finally, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "And we prepare. This thing will return. And next time, we won't have the luxury of surprise." As they retraced their steps back toward the town, the valley seemed smaller, the world more fragile. Shadows moved in the treetops, subtle, almost imperceptible, as if watching. Elias realized with a chill that the dragon had not been alone. One encounter was just the beginning. That night, Elias stood once again at the cliff edge, looking out over the valley. Flames flickered in the distance, red smoke curling toward the sky. Somewhere in that darkness, the dragon waited. And somewhere beyond, more of its kind stirred. The stories of old had warned of an age when dragons would reclaim the skies. Humanity had never believed. But now, Elias knew, that age had arrived. The crimson sky was no longer a warning. It was a promise. The town's council chamber was alive with tension, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Reports from the reconnaissance team had spread like wildfire, eyewitness accounts, charred forests, scorched livestock, and, most terrifyingly, the description of the dragon itself. Maps littered the table, pins marking sightings, and everyone spoke in hurried, clipped tones, each afraid to meet another's gaze. Captain Elias Thorne stood at the center, trying to impose order on the panic. "We've seen it," he said simply. "One dragon is bad. 100, we don't even have a word for what that means." Dr. Mara Litton, a historian specializing in ancient civilizations, leaned forward, her finger tracing the edges of a map. "Legends speak of the Crimson Age. Dragons ruled the skies, hunting indiscriminately, shaping the land itself. The stories were dismissed because humans survived. But survival doesn't mean understanding. They didn't leave, they hid." "Hidden where?" Marcus Hale asked, still shaken from the canyon encounter. "In caves? Mountains? What could possibly have allowed them to stay invisible for centuries?" Dr. Litton's eyes darkened. "Not invisible. Dormant. Slumbering, waiting for the right conditions to awaken. Something triggered them, something unnatural." Elias frowned. "You mean, we did?" "It's possible," Litton said. "Large-scale industrial activity, atmospheric changes, even the war games we conduct with drones and satellites, they could have disturbed their habitat. But the true catalyst, we may never know. All we know is that they are here, now, and they are not scattered. They are organized." The room fell silent. "Organized?" Marcus whispered, voice trembling. "You mean they're intelligent?" "Yes," Elias said, grim. "The canyon proved it. They weren't attacking at random. They observed, calculated, then struck. They are predators in the purest sense, but predators who plan. And if one has that intelligence, he didn't need to finish." Outside, the sky had begun to shift again, a subtle crimson bleeding along the horizon, creeping higher with each passing hour. The town's residents stared skyward with unease, sensing the same change that had terrified the valley before. Smoke and ash hung faintly in the air, carried from the distant forests. The dragons were stirring. Dr. Litton opened an ancient tome she had brought, pages brittle with age. These texts, they are fragmented, scattered across cultures. But all describe a phenomenon in the sky. A crimson light that precedes the dragon's return. Some call it a warning. Others, a signal. "A signal for what?" Elias asked. The historian's voice dropped. "For the awakening. For the convergence. When the sky turns crimson, it is not just a warning for humans. It is a call for dragons to gather. To hunt. To reclaim their world." The weight of her words pressed down on everyone in the room. The crimson sky was no longer merely terrifying, it was purposeful. It was orchestrated. A sudden alarm cut through the room. A drone camera from the northern ridge had captured movement. Elias and his team rushed to the feed. The screen flickered, showing a massive shadow in the clouds, wings spanning wider than any known bird. And then, more shapes appeared, gliding in perfect formation, riding thermal currents as if rehearsing a centuries-old choreography. "They're coming," Marcus breathed. "All of them?" "Possibly," Elias said. His hands clenched into fists. "We don't know the numbers, but this isn't a scouting mission. This is a mobilization." Dr. Litton turned toward him, urgency in her tone. "There is something else you must understand. The texts hint at a hierarchy, elders, leaders, guardians. Not all dragons act the same. Some may be hunters, some defenders, and some, strategists. The one you encountered in the canyon, it may not even have been the alpha. That's what's most frightening. The alpha is said to be capable of coordinating attacks across vast distances, almost like a commander." Elias swallowed, staring out at the faint red glow of the horizon. The enormity of the threat pressed down on him. Humanity had never faced anything like this, not in war, not in nature, not in history. They were suddenly small, fragile, and expendable in a world that had once belonged to the dragons. "Then we need to learn," Elias said finally. "We need to know their patterns, their weaknesses, everything. If we wait until they attack full force, it will be too late." Litton nodded, her face pale. "There is one lead. An old observatory to the east, abandoned for decades. Its telescopes and archives may hold records of historical sightings, flight paths, and whatever caused the last awakening. If we can access it, we might understand the pattern, maybe even anticipate their movements. Elias exhaled sharply. Then that's our next move. Reckon to the observatory. We gather intelligence. We prepare. And we pray it's not already too late. As the team left the council chamber, the town fell into uneasy silence. Windows were shut tight, fires lit for warmth and comfort, but the crimson sky loomed above, unyielding and omnipresent. Somewhere in the distance, wings flapped against the clouds. The air seemed heavier, charged with the presence of something ancient. For the first time, Elias realized that survival would not come from weapons alone, nor strategy alone. They had to understand these creatures, to anticipate them, and perhaps even outthink them. Humanity had reclaimed the world once before, against impossible odds. Now, they faced a predator that had already ruled the skies for millennia. The secret of the crimson sky was no longer hidden. It was a warning, a challenge, and an invitation to a confrontation that would decide the fate of all who lived beneath it. Elias stood on the cliff outside town that evening, staring at the horizon where the red light lingered like a slow-burning wound. The dragon they had encountered was only the beginning. The sky was calling, and humanity had no choice but to answer. The sky had gone from crimson to a burning inferno. Dawn brought no calm, only a heavy, oppressive glow that set the valley ablaze before the first human fires even caught. Reports poured in from outlying settlements, livestock incinerated, homes flattened, and trails of scorched earth marking the passage of unseen predators. The reconnaissance team had returned from the observatory, bringing crucial information about dragon flight paths and patterns, but it was little comfort. Knowing their enemy existed didn't make them less terrifying. Captain Elias Thorne stood atop the ridge overlooking the valley, binoculars in hand. The dragons were moving in formations now, flying low and fast, testing human defenses, probing the landscape. Each movement was calculated, strategic. They weren't hunting randomly, they were learning. And humanity had to respond before it became too late. "Sir," Marcus Hale called, pointing toward the approaching shadows. "They're moving toward the town. Full assault." Elias exhaled, forcing calm. "Then we fight. Not to win. Not yet. But to survive, to buy time." The town had prepared. Artillery had been moved to elevated positions, electrified fences erected, and flamethrower emplacements set along key choke points. It wasn't much, but it was something. The humans were outmatched in every measurable way. Wingspans wider than buildings, scales impervious to most conventional weapons, intelligence beyond their own, yet, here they were, standing ready to confront a predator older than civilization itself. The first strike came without warning. One dragon dove from the sky, fire erupting from its jaws. Trees disintegrated instantly, rocks melted, and a squad of soldiers barely managed to dive behind their barricades. Another followed, circling low, its tail smashing the guard tower and sending splintered wood flying. Elias signaled to the artillery crews. "Fire at the gaps. Don't aim for the body, force them to break formation." Explosions erupted, lighting the smoke-filled air, but the dragons adjusted immediately, weaving between attacks, communicating with shrill, almost musical roars. They weren't just hunting, they were coordinating, strategizing, testing weaknesses. Humans were learning too, but painfully, through fire and loss. Marcus fired his rifle, hitting the edge of a wing, and the dragon shrieked, momentarily staggered. Elias grabbed his arm. "Focus on observation. Every reaction they make tells us more than any single shot ever could." Hours passed, and the battle raged across the valley. Flames consumed the outer fields, smoke curling into the crimson-tinged sky. Helicopters attempted strafing runs, drones equipped with explosives swooped in, but every attempt was met with precision, almost surgical counterattacks. Humanity was fighting with courage, but courage alone wasn't enough. Amid the chaos, Elias noticed movement at the edge of the battlefield. One dragon broke formation, moving differently, circling higher than the others. Its eyes glowed brighter, its posture commanding. The Alpha. And it wasn't just observing, they were being hunted, measured, and herded into the valley like prey. "We need a plan," Elias said, voice steady despite the chaos. "We can't outfight them directly. But we can trap them." Dr. Litton had joined them on the ridge, pointing toward an abandoned dam upstream. "The riverbed is narrow here," she said. "If we can lure them toward it, we can use the terrain against them. Limited maneuverability might give our weapons a chance to land." Elias nodded. Then that's what we do. We force them to fight where we have an advantage. Everyone, fall back, regroup at the dam. Prepare the explosives. We're buying humanity its first real chance. The retreat was perilous. The dragons harried every move, swooping and diving with lethal precision. Buildings burned, roads cracked, and panic threatened to overwhelm the townspeople. Yet, Elias and his team maintained discipline, using decoys, signal flares, and calculated movements to guide the dragons along their chosen path. By evening, the valley funneled into the riverbed. The humans had set charges, camouflaged artillery, and strategically placed flamethrowers. The dragons descended, following instinct, intelligence, and the humans' carefully orchestrated lure. The first explosion erupted as one massive beast stepped directly into the trap. Its shriek echoed through the canyon, shaking the earth, but it survived, limping. The others scattered momentarily, only to regroup. Elias and his team adjusted rapidly, artillery and flamethrowers striking in precise sequence. One dragon faltered, scales cracked, wings singed. Another was driven against the riverbank, trapped briefly by terrain and human firepower. It was a small victory, but enough to prove a critical truth: humans could fight back. Humans could survive. As night fell, the valley lay in ruin. Fires burned unchecked, shadows of dragons traced against the remaining crimson sky. Yet, amid the devastation, a fragile hope persisted. Humanity had struck back, and lived to see the sky darken again. Elias stood atop the ridge, looking down at the exhausted survivors, soldiers, and civilians alike. "We didn't win," he said quietly, "but we learned. They're organized, intelligent, deadly, but they are not invincible. And neither are we. This fight is far from over." Above, the Alpha circled, massive wings slicing through the smoky sky. It paused, watching the humans, its eyes glowing with a mixture of curiosity and something deeper: strategy, intelligence, perhaps even respect. Elias understood then that this war would not just be about firepower. It would be about ingenuity, courage, and the unyielding will of humanity. The crimson sky pulsed one last time before fading into a dark, foreboding night. Tomorrow, the dragons would return. And humanity would be ready. The night was silent, but not peaceful. Fires still smoldered across the valley, and the smell of smoke and scorched earth lingered like a warning. Captain Elias Thorne stood on the ridge, overlooking the destruction, eyes scanning the horizon. Above, the faint crimson glow still lingered, a reminder that the dragons were never far. Dr. Mara Litton approached, carrying maps and old texts salvaged from the observatory. "The Alpha," she said, her voice grim. "It's learning. Each encounter it survives makes it smarter. If we don't end this tonight, humanity may never have another chance." Elias exhaled, gripping his rifle. "Then we end it tonight." The plan was desperate, almost suicidal. Using the remaining forces, they would lure the Alpha into a narrow canyon far upriver, where explosives had been strategically placed and artillery could concentrate fire. It was the only terrain that might level the playing field against a predator that could crush buildings with a single swipe. "Everyone ready?" Elias asked, voice carrying over the murmurs of soldiers and civilians hiding behind makeshift barricades. Nods and murmurs confirmed it. Fear was present, yes, but so was determination. Humanity had survived impossible odds before, and they would survive again. The Alpha appeared first. Wings slicing through the sky, scales glinting like molten metal in the last light of the crimson horizon. It landed atop a ridge, massive claws digging into stone. Its eyes locked on Elias and the humans below, intelligent, calculating, almost aware. The humans advanced carefully, using decoys, fire lines, and signal flares to guide the dragon into the canyon. It roared, a sound that shook the earth, rattled the bones, and sent waves of fear surging through every soldier and civilian in the valley. But Elias held his ground. The Alpha was watching, testing, anticipating. And he had to stay one step ahead. As the dragon descended into the canyon, fire and smoke erupted from the humans' traps. Explosives ignited along the cliffsides, rocks shattered, and flamethrowers lined the walls, forcing the Alpha to maneuver within the narrow confines. It was enraged, wings beating violently, sending shockwaves that knocked soldiers off their feet. Yet, for every attack, the humans adapted, holding their positions, striking at the few exposed areas of its underbelly and wings. Elias remembered the shimmer markers had spotted in the canyon, the faint paler scale along the dragon's chest. That would be their target. Every shot was aimed there, precise, calculated. Every strike was coordinated, each soldier following Elias' commands without hesitation. The dragon faltered. A high-pitched shriek pierced the canyon as a volley of incendiary rounds struck the vulnerable spot. It crashed against the canyon wall, wings folding in pain, tail smashing boulders as it struggled to regain balance. Now! Elias shouted. Artillery and flamethrowers unleashed a torrent of fire, smoke, and explosions, the confined canyon amplifying every impact. The dragon roared in fury, twisting and diving, but there was no room to escape. For a moment, it seemed impossible. The Alpha's intelligence, its strategy, kept it one step ahead of every human tactic. But desperation, courage, and ingenuity carried the day. Elias and his team had forced the dragon into a trap it couldn't adapt to in time. Finally, with a deafening, ear-splitting roar, the Alpha crashed to the canyon floor, wings pinned, scales scorched, movement sluggish. Elias approached cautiously, rifle raised but ready for anything. The dragon's eyes met his, intense, golden, ancient, and yet, something else lingered there. Recognition. Understanding. A mutual acknowledgement of the struggle they had endured against one another. It was over. For now. The survivors emerged from their hiding places, exhaustion etched into every face, yet hope flickering in their eyes. They had done the impossible. They had faced a creature that had ruled the skies for centuries and lived. Elias lowered his rifle, letting out a long breath. The canyon was silent now, save for the crackle of fires and the distant cries of those who had lost everything. Humanity had survived, but the cost was heavy. Lives lost, towns destroyed, and a reminder that the world was far larger, far older, and far more dangerous than they had ever realized. Dr. Lytton approached Elias, her expression solemn. "This was only one," she said quietly. "There are others. Elders, perhaps even more alpha than this one. Humanity has bought time, but the war isn't over." Elias nodded. He gazed at the sky, crimson now fading into night, stars piercing the darkness. "Then we prepare. We learn. We fight smarter next time. If dragons are going to reclaim the skies, we're going to prove humanity isn't going down without a fight." Above, the faint echo of wings stirred in the distance, reminding everyone that the sky was still alive with predators. But beneath it, humanity had discovered something just as powerful: resilience, courage, and the relentless will to survive. And as long as that fire burned, as long as humans stood united, no creature, no matter how ancient, massive, or intelligent, could claim dominion over the earth without challenge. The crimson sky had faded. The dragons had been bested, for now. But humanity had risen. And the world would never be the same.